Hi there, Lindsay here, the Frugal Crafter. Today we're going to paint a loose, big, gorgeous bouquet of peonies. And if you like this lesson today, please check out my watercolor floral workshop. I'll have it linked down below, and I'll put a little coupon code for you in there too if you want to check it out. This bouquet I actually picked up a this larger bouquet of silk flowers at the craft store, and I was really impressed with how high quality the silk flowers were. So I bought it. I splurged. It was kind of expensive, but I bought it so I could make these two smaller displays like this for my mantle, because I like to redo my mantle several times a year. And I love the fact that these are not going to dry out and go bad in a week like regular flowers would, especially as we start using our fireplace as the weather gets colder. So I just wanted to show you this bouquet so you'd kind of have a frame of reference. And we are going to begin just by doing a very loose, quick sketch. And by loose, I mean extremely loose. I want to get the pot, which is just basically a small ceramic votive holder. I just want to get the basic shape in here. It's just kind of squat and low, and it has an interesting origami almost design on it. And I will share a photograph of this. So I'm just going to put a little bit of hatching in there just to get the design of the origami. It's almost like it's got these indentations that are kind of, well, I'll show you. I just don't want to disrupt my whole thing. It's kind of like honeycomb, or like a pineapple, how a pineapple has that design to it. So I just wanted to get that in there, but you're not going to see all of it because we'll have these big flowers. So I'm doing that in a very light gray color erase pencil, so I can erase it if I want to, but I really don't think I will end up needing to do that. Now I just want to put in some gestures of the big peonies. And the other reason I'm using a color erase pencil is that if I used a watercolor pencil, I would lose my lines really easily, and I don't want that to happen. Look at this big one that's kind of up like that. Okay, so those are just my basic gesture lines. I'm not sure if you can really even see them. I'm going to tip it. Maybe you can see how light they are. But it helps me space everything out. And then I want to figure out where I want to put my, my leaves. And these I will draw in a little bit more precisely, just so that I don't go completely off the rails with them. Now, I am standing because I wanted to look at my my bouquet pretty much at eye level. So I just wanted to mention that. And I'll try to photograph it right from the level I'm looking at it so it can be easier for you if you're painting it along at home. Now, this is going to be done in a loose style, so I really don't need to have a ton of detail. So if you don't want to put all this in, you do not have to. I'm not going to draw in any vines. I'm going to reserve any vines for kind of like last minute alterations at the end if I feel like I need to balance something out a little bit. I do want to get a little bit more of the peonies drawn in just so I have that kind of structure. So I'm just going to start with the center petal here, and I'm going to draw them darker than I would if I wasn't filming a video. Generally I find that my camera loves to, if I'm working on white paper, it just overexposes or underexposes. It just seems to get all wonky with everything, and then it's hard to see stuff. So I just want to make sure that you can see it. But at home, you're working on this, don't draw it so dark, okay? You want to be able to, you know, not see those lines on the finished painting if you opt not to. Now, of course, I can go ahead and erase them a little bit if I want to, but I'll tell you what, I really don't like to erase on watercolor paper. I mean, it's nice to have that option and all, but I really try not to, because when you erase on watercolor paper, it can disrupt the surface, and it can give you a it can grab the paint unevenly, so then you have you'll have darker spots where you're not anticipating them, and then it can kind of mess things up, especially if you've taken the time to do a nice drawing and do nice washes and stuff. So I just want to make sure I'm not going to leave any texture on the surface. So there's our first peony. I'll bring it up again just so you can see. Okay. You refer to my photo. Now, if you want to print my photo off and trace it, go ahead. All right, I'm not doing that. I'm not even going to worry about it being that accurate. So if you want a super accurate drawing, then just go to my blog, thefrugalcrafter.wordpress.com. I usually post the photos the day after the tutorial's up on YouTube, and so you'll have to wait a day, but just go ahead and just print it off. So you can start your drawing from the inside or the outside. I start really loosely, so it doesn't really matter. I always have a little room to alter it if I need to, and also by not putting details in until you've got the structure. Gosh, I feel like I'm talking so fast, I apologize. By not putting in details until I've got the structure, that makes it so I don't have to erase very much. I'm just getting the impression of these really curvy, interesting leaves, and there's going to be some stamens here in the center, so I'm just going to loosely sketch those in. And then this guy up here, who's so pretty, you're seeing it kind of like at a side view. Just going to get some of those side petals. Oh, so pretty. I really couldn't, and it's probably because I'm so cheap, and I always shop at the dollar stores and the Dollar Tree for like silk flowers for like crafts and stuff, that I've never paid real money for, you know, silk flowers. I've always gotten the cheap dollar store ones and then like cut them up and altered them to fit what I need, or like filled in with other fabrics and stuff to make them look a little bit better. But boy, there are some really nice silk flowers, so I hope you don't think it's tacky. I think that they were really pretty. All right, so I've got my sketch done. I'm not going to erase anything. If you want to, you could go in and erase, but I don't think those really light sketch lines are really going to show. So then what I'm going to do is take a really soft brush, and I'm going to flick on some water. Look at that. I'm really just flicking on that water. This paper is Hahnemühle Expression. I know it can take the water, and I like when I go and start to do some washes, how it will sometimes catch, like my paint will sometimes catch those puddles and do some really interesting stuff. So I'm just going to go ahead and spray my palette. I'm using my Studio palette, which is a hodgepodge of different brands. It's got some Da Vinci, it's got some M. Graham, it's got some Winsor & Newton. It's got everything but the kitchen sink in this palette. And I'm going to start off with some permanent alizarin crimson. You can any slightly cool leaning red. And I'm using a mop. And I've had this brush for about 25 years. And, you know, you take care of your brushes, they will last you. And I'm just going to start going in where I see my most deepest and impactful colors. And look at that. That's what I'm talking about, where it kind of slurps off into the edge. And slurp is like totally a art term, isn't it? I'm just going in and throwing in my darkest color. I like to get my dark values in first, and I know not everybody does, but the reason I like to do this is that I think it makes you brave. Because if you're worried about messing up a painting and you save those darks for last, you might be kind of timid and then not actually do much with those colors because you're so worried about messing it up. So if you get it, like if you do it right off the bat, you don't have to worry so much because you've already got the darks down. If it's awful, you can always start again. So now what I'm going to do is clean my brush. I've got 2 buckets of water here. I've got one for clean and one for dirty. I'm going to clean my brush off in the dirty water. Now I generally, if I'm not filming, I have my buckets of water over to my right hand side because I'm right-handed and not over my picture because sometimes I tend to drip water while I'm going. So I just wanted to mention that. I'm going to grab some lemon yellow. This is cadmium lemon. You can use whatever cool yellow you want. The reason I want cool yellow is because I want to warm it up to a coral, but I don't want to have orange. So that's going to allow me to do that. I'm going to grab a little bit, you know what, I think I'm going to grab some permanent rose too. Let's get a little bit more of a pinky color in there too. So we've got these 2 colors to work with. This is a much less intense color. I'm going to throw some of that in. And now I'm going to grab a little bit of the yellow. I like to let a lot of my colors just mix on the paper. Now don't worry if it gets really messy and doesn't look like a flower. We're going to bring it together. So right now we're getting these colors down. Okay, so don't worry if you feel like you've just lost all of your definition. That's totally fine. Remember, things also dry lighter. So I'm putting some of that color in the background. If you want a bigger splat of color, you can do a couple things. One thing you can do is you can pick up your color and you can actually just drip it into a splash you already have there. That's a great way to control it. Or you can spatter on bigger colors by using a bigger brush and making juicier paint. So if I have really wet, sloppy paint here, See, I can like really get some big splashes of color there. If you have something, if you're kind of like, oh, I wish I didn't have a bunch of that bleeding, you can fix that too. So what you want to do is you need to drink up some of that extra color. So you take your brush, you dry it, you dry it off, and then you can kind of go in and you can say, yeah, it's a little too much there. I'm just going to pick that up. And then you end up with that nice soft edge. It looks very natural. You might have a little bit of stain to the paper, but by the time you're done, it doesn't really matter because that's going to have so much other things going on that it's not going to be an issue. I'm just going to tip that a little bit. I'm afraid that you might be getting some glare. And I didn't tape my paper down. I think I might do that right there too. Wipe off my brush, go in again. Just soften that edge because it just seemed a little harsh to me. So you really want to kind of go intuitively. Do what you feel your painting needs. Don't worry so much about this rule or that rule. Just, you know, kind of jump in there. Now, I think I actually want to move over to some green colors because I like to bounce around, and I actually would like to get some of the work on the vase done right now. So I am going to take a little bit of Ultramarine. Ultramarine is such a useful color for me. I use it in most paintings, and I like to mix with it because it has a nice texture to it. It granulates, which means you see the pigments kind of like float on top of the surface. I'm going to grab a little bit of burnt sienna. Those two colors together make a really nice gray. And I'm going to grab a little bit of the permanent rose in there to purple it up a little bit because I want kind of a purpley gray. Okay. Now I generally wouldn't do so. I think I'm going to switch to I'll go in with a flat because of the texture and the shape that I want to get in the vase. I'm going to try to load that up. This is a synthetic flat. It's not terribly absorbent, but I think it's going to help me get what I want here. And I am just trying to get that geometric. It's not really a pattern, it's more of an impression on my vase because of the, it's a ceramic, it's a white ceramic vase, but it's got that, you know, that texture in it. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm just wanting to get that impression of the geometric strokes. Nothing is going to be extremely detailed here. Can get some shadows in under where the leaves are going to be. And I really just want it to be very subtle. Now I do like to drag shadows out from the bottoms of vases, and I love colorful shadows. So I'm going to go back in with my mop here and throw in some shadow, drag it out. You can reclaim the edges if you feel like you want like a little bit of a light edge, you can do that. We don't have a lot of, this is fairly eye level, so there's a little curve to the bottom because the bottom of this vase is slightly below eye level and the flowers are just right about bridge of my nose. Like the top of this, where I'm looking at it, is like the kind of like right across the bridge of my nose, like between my eyes. So there would be a subtle curve down there, but nothing too drastic. Just want to make sure that I've got some shadows under the leaves that I sketched in there and behind the leaves. And it doesn't hurt to let some of those colors bleed down in. At least I don't think it does. That's a nice big leaf there. Okay. And I think I'd also like to get a little bit of that blue in there. There is a lesson, actually, I can show you because I have it tacked up on my wall because I just did a local class with this with that technique. But there's a lesson that's very this uses many of the same techniques. It's doing lilacs in a jar, in the Watercolor Floral Workshop that does some of these techniques to help you kind of like loosen up, and I'll show you that because this is one of the lessons that you would paint along with me. So that's from the course, if you want to check that out. There's a lot in that course, a lot of different flowers. Okay, and now I think I want to get a few of the green leaves, and just so I get that, just so I get the feeling of that color, I know how it's going to look, and I've got, you know, my different balances of color. So I've already used the lemon, so I know that that is safe. I also want to use some sap green. Let's see, do I have sap green? That's not sap green, that's Viridian. I think this might be sap green here. It's hard to tell. I've got three very similar greens next to each other. Yeah, I think those are both sap. Okay. And I am going to just throw in some leaves. If your leaves want to blend up to the your pink flowers, you might want to blot that. I like a brush that's got a full belly and comes to a nice point, because you can like, you can really compose with it. You can like get these fine lines, and you can get these really fat strokes, and it just works so well in this technique. And it carries so much paint and water that you don't have to keep reloading, which is really nice. Gonna need another one down here. And I'll leave some bits of white because I can either go in and add yellow, or I can just let it be. I can leave it white. Having good quality paint, good quality paper is really helpful. The only time I would recommend against it is if it makes you nervous. If it makes you like not want to paint because you're worried about wasting it, then I would say go for the cheap stuff, because the important thing is that you feel free to use that paper. If you feel like you're not good enough or you're wasting it, then that's so harmful. That's so harmful to your growth. I'm going to grab some blue, a little bit of burnt sienna. I want it real dark in here, so let's get in there. Let's get us some shadow there. Yeah, that's good. That's good stuff. A little shadow under there too. Don't forget about your contrast. You know, just because it's watercolor doesn't mean it needs to be all wishy-washy and light. You want to get your contrast in there. I wasn't sure what I wanted to paint today, and I was thinking, geez, maybe I should take the week off. It's a busy day. It's been a busy week. All the kids had dental appointments. The dog had a vet appointment. It's like, it's such a crazy week. But I was like, oh, it's all those crazy weeks that it's like really important to paint, I think, because that's when you need that relaxation time, am I right? All right, so I'm going to take a paper towel. I noticed I had a bead of color here, and I'm just going to drag it across that bead and soak up the excess. Now, if I didn't, what would happen was I would get this backwash. It's also called a cauliflower. It's just like kind of a ruffly bloom on the bottom, and I knew I didn't want that effect. So if you like that effect, then you don't need to do that. But I just thought I would kind of tell you. Okay, I feel like I would like a little more yellow happening here. Let's do a little bit of yellow in some of our leaves. And, ooh, dropped my brush. See, I have such a light hold on my brush that I often drop it. You don't want a death grip. If you feel like you've got a death grip on that brush, you're holding it too tight. Okay, and this one, I think I'll start with my lights. I'm going to start in first with my yellow. And I noticed I had quite a bit of warmer colors and lighter colors up on this part of the flower, and also down here. Oops, we've got some invasion with that green. So I'm just going to blot that up. I really want to dry that area up so I can get in there with a lighter color. A little softness at the edge is fine, but I wanted to make sure that I don't contaminate that yellow. Yellow is so easy to contaminate. Something else I want to mention about watercolors and using good watercolors is that, you know, watercolor is probably the slowest wearing of all the paints. So it's not like you're going to empty a tube of watercolor in your palette and it's going to be gone in a week. I mean, some of these paints I squeezed out. Some of these paints were in the paint in this palette when the previous owner had it. That's a secondhand palette, and you just wear so slow. So especially the higher quality paints, they don't wear down as quickly because it only takes a little bit to get a lot of pigment. So keep that in mind. You know, if you've already bought and paid for the watercolor, you own it, it's yours. Use it. You're not going to wear it up. I'm also going to get some of this color back here on this flower. Just paint the sunshine. What I'm doing here, I'm just adding it in where I think there's light. Now, I am going to dry off a brush and sop up that little bit of paint. Oh shoot! This paint rag is so wet now. I just wrung it out on my paper. Don't do that, guys. There we go. I'm just going to sop up that little bead, because I want to go close to it and I don't want to, I didn't want to disturb that leaf. I like the way that leaf looks, but I don't want to backwash. Okay, so now I can go fairly close to it and not have an issue. Let's get some of that pink in there now. I love to just kind of throw the paint on at this stage and just let it go, like see what it can do. And then let that layer dry, and then I can go in with the details. Look at that pretty coral. Isn't that nice? That's the permanent rose and that cad yellow. I love it when it mixes on the paper too. You need variety. You need changes in your values. A little bit of that up. That's just a little more than I wanted. And now I will charge in. Now I'm going to dry my brush off because I don't want a lot of water in there. I might even actually have to go to a stiffer brush, but I'm going to see if I can manage this one because I love the way it feels. Now I'm going to go in and I'm going to add this really dark permanent alizarin crimson, like we started off there, onto some of these edges, so I can define the tips of the palette of the petal, but it can kind of float in. I'm actually going to use a different brush. I'll go with this number 10 Zen. Okay. Yeah, because this one is less absorbent, so I can get a lot of paint on it without a lot of water, and I can really kind of carve in some of those details. So you use brushes of different materials, different stiffnesses, depending on the effects that you want to achieve. I like almost calligraphy-like lines. Even though I'm not a calligrapher, I like my lines to kind of have that quality. Don't worry if it looks really messy, because it will at this stage. That is the nature of the beast. And around some of those petals a little bit. And you're probably thinking, why don't I just let it dry and come back in and do my details later? And the reason for that is you've got to have something in the midground. You have the really sloppy, loose, you know, splattering on the paint layers. And then we're going in here with this kind of pasty paint, which is giving us a little bit more definition. And then we can go in with our really detailed layer later. And not even really detailed. I mean, just like a few sharp lines. I should say my sharper layer, not really more detailed layer. But we can do that later. And look, some of these like slooshes can turn into petals. And then you just get the most natural looking petals and leaves this way, because you let the water do the work. You're not like having to make every decision. You're kind of letting the water do its thing, and then you're dealing with it, which I think makes a really nice effect. I get that a little bit later. I want to get a little bit of that yellowy in there. Okay. If you want to lighten anything up in the background, now is the time to blot it. Otherwise, I think we're going to let it dry at this stage. Oh, I don't really like that. What's going on there? There's some yellow there. I like yellow in the sky area and the top because it helps brighten things up. Another thing you can do is you can add in your color with a brush, and you can spritz it with a spray bottle. I like doing this standing up because I feel like I can see what's going on a lot more. I can see the whole painting at once and I don't have the skew. So if you feel like, it's too speckly, I don't like that, you can go in and just soften it that way. And then I would go in with a clean dry brush and just kind of spread what you don't like that's too speckly. And it also helps dry up some puddles. A little more color up there, I think. And if you have too much definition in the flowers and you don't like it, you can spray right over them and you can soften them up too. I think I'm going to have another petal there, so I'm just kind of spreading that out a little bit. I think I do want a little more speckle on top. I think I took out too much. That's pretty watered down, so it's not going to be too crazy. And I do want some more yellow because I like that kind of sunlit sky feeling. Flick that on there. If you want to control, you can put your hand kind of over an area you want to control. And if you flick on paint that's wetter, the way you have underneath you, it will push out and give you lighter sparkles, lighter colors. Like the speckles will be lighter than the background. Alright, so we are at the hot mess stage. We are going to let this dry, and when we come back, we will refine it a bit. Alright, this had plenty of time to dry. I took a little lunch break, and I let it air dry. I did go over it with my heat tool at the end just to make sure that there weren't any damp areas in the background, but I like to let it dry, air dry, because you get the kind of sedimentation and you get the like the little blossoms, and you get the granulation, and I just think it kind of gives you a nice quality. So what I'm doing here is mixing up a dark gray using my ultramarine blue and burnt sienna, and I'm going to go in and put in some dark shadows at the bottom of the vase. So what I want to get here is like the kind of little bit of a faceted bottom. That the vase has. Help get the form there. And then I'm actually going to pull out some shadow. So I'm going with water or very, very watered down paint. And just pulling out a little bit of clear water where my shadow could flow to. Because there's really not a lot of color down there right now, so I can just kind of go in and I can drop it in there and let it go, let it flow. Get that little subtle curve in there that we see. I'm sitting down now, and oh, I got that little crooked I can see. And I think I'll go with a bigger brush and spread out that water a bit so it can wick out a little bit more. I also feel like I want a little bit of yellow in that vase. Maybe a little bit of pink. Just kind of reflected here and there. I think I want some of that shadow broken up a little bit too. Okay, that's good for now. I can feel my paper feels a little bit limp, so I know there is still a little bit of dampness on there, but it shouldn't be enough to bother anything. The next thing I want to go in and do is add those stamens. So I'm going to go in, because I don't think the silk flower colors are quite right. So I'm going to go in first with a mix of the cad yellow, lemon, and a little bit of that pink that I had on my palette. Cadmium yellows, any cadmium colors actually, are a little bit more opaque. So I know I can kind of go in there and throw some of this color in, and it will hold its own against the colors I have in the background. Do that over here a little bit too. Tuck a little bit in there. And then I am going to grab the brown and blue, but mostly brown, and make just some little accents there. I'm going to go with a really responsive brush. This is a mimic squirrel, number 8, size 8 round. It's a faux fur brush, but it holds quite a bit of paint, excuse me, but it also keeps a nice sharp point. And it just is nice to paint with. It bends really well. It goes with your motions really well. And I am going to accent some of these strokes, some of these petals. I like to save, if I see some nice white bits in there, I try to save those because they're nice to have in there. They get a little bit of, they give you a little bit of a highlight. A few of the petals back there. And a lot of this is kind of like deciding what you want to keep and accentuate and what you want to just kind of let fade away. It's nice to have a big mixing area, whether you use a dinner plate or you have an actual palette, because it just gives you all this space to spread out and keep your colors out and keep your colors fresh as you're working. I don't always have room to show this on camera, but it's I think it's nice because it does give you that little more space to mix out. It gives you a little more, you can see a little bit more of what I'm doing. All right, we're going to move over here, pretty much do the same thing. I'm going to go in with my crimson first. So a lot of times these like areas where the paint has flowed out will give you really great places to add petals. It will almost have done some of the work for you. It's a very abstract type of or way of painting, so it's really easy to get kind of lost with all the shapes. But I find skipping around from flower to flower helps. Now I'm going to take ultramarine blue and the crimson, alizarin crimson, and make a nice dark. It's kind of going to be like a wine red color. And I'm going to add that to this flower in back, and I'm going around the petals on the flower in front, so I can kind of break those flowers apart. So this is kind of a negative painting technique when you go in there and you start painting around things. It's going to help give shadow to that flower in back and separate. You can actually bring that shadow into the greenery. And then what I like to do is rinse my brush off, blot it, and then just fade that color. No, this brush is not absorbent enough. You can fade the color in. Alright, it's starting to come together. I like that color a lot, that purpley color that I made, so I think I'm going to add some of that into the centers. It helps tie it together too. It's richer than the brown. And if you use a color one place, you can use it other places, and it works. I already want to have this leaf come forward and this leaf go back, so I'm going to take some of the ultramarine blue and the green. And the only reason I'm using ultramarine is because that's the only blue I've used, so I don't want to bring in a new color this late in the game. Go with a bigger brush. I really kind of want to flood this area. Get some of that shadow right underneath there. Make your strokes count. I'm going to set these damp paper towels right next to my water dish so I can wipe off the excess. I like to soften some of these edges too. Oops, I wish I didn't obliterate that line quite so much. I feel like I lost that freshness by doing that. Oh, that's too bad. Oh well, we're going to move on. Bringing some definition back to some of these flowers. These are good. They don't. This doesn't have quite as much response as like the mop I was using originally, but it is pretty good, and it is a little easier to control. But I feel like I don't have quite as much. I don't know. I don't feel like my lines are quite as lyrical using that. So I'm going to go back to the mop. We'll see. Hopefully. The thing is, I tend to use less water as I go on, and then using the mop, it carries so much water that I can't get the intensity of line that I want. I get more of a mushy color. See what I mean? But I love the shape of the brush strokes that I get. Pluses and minuses to everything. Oops. I want there to be 2 leaves here, I think. Before I had 1, but it kind of morphed out where it hit a puddle of water. So I think 2 works better there. I'm going to go in there with a little bit of that dark. Maybe that will help this one stand out a little bit. If I do go in and paint something over, I like to kind of paint it as though I didn't have anything there before, like just kind of go right over the whole thing. Sometimes I just want to go in there and just sharpen an edge. You'll know what your painting needs. It's probably not going to be exactly what mine needs. And I love that little piece right there. It looks like I could get another leaf in there. So I think that's what I'm going to do. Alright, I wanted to have some trailing foliage, so I'm going to use this brush. I really just love this brush. And I am going to just kind of throw Just a few little things in here, not exactly where they are in my arrangement. And I think I'll add a little bit more yellow to that. Both of my waters are completely dirty, by the way. I totally did not practice what I preach today. And I am going to just kind of go these almost little succulent like blobs. I like the shape I'm making by the stabbing motion. It's giving me kind of like these little wedge-shaped leaves. I just like it. I think it's interesting. I want a third thing because that just kind of looks kind of blobbing just too. When you're doing something like this, make sure you go over your stem as well. You put some of your blobs there, otherwise it will look like they just kind of spring forth either side and don't actually, you know, come out of your flower. Hope that makes sense. I'm gonna do some, let's try the ultramarine blue and a little bit of that yellow. Get kind of like a tealy grade color, kind of like almost like a blue spruce color. I'd like to do something just another shape. Pick up some of the color and spatter it a bit. And maybe a little bit of that into the shadow. Now we get into the thinking time. We're thinking about how we want to finish things up. We're thinking about what does our picture need. I'm going back in with my smaller brush, that kind of purpley mix of ultramarine blue and crimson. And at this point, I want to make sure that I really have some details in here that are crisp. A lot of times I just kind of go through and see the shapes that my brush strokes have made, and I just kind of accentuate the ones that look the most like the petals that I want to have. I'm going to switch to a liner brush just because it's going to hold more paint. And then I don't have to reload quite so often. And you don't want to do every petal because then it's gonna look kind of cartoony. And we're not going for realistic, but we just want to kind of get that essence. And if you get too kind of outliney with it, then you lose that. Now the drawback to using a liner versus using just a pointed round is that you don't have as much control, because those longer bristles want to kind of bend on you sometimes when you're drawing, and it can be hard to keep the line exactly the way you want it. So, you know, you get the ability not to have to load up so often, but then you do have a little bit less control. which actually can be very helpful if you tend to be really fussy and you want to loosen up a little bit, because you can't be too tight with this type of technique. And I try not to work too much with one brush at this stage, because I find that if I do, sometimes everything just looks a little too samey. So then I will switch to another brush and do some strokes just to keep a good variety. So I'd go back to this number 8 round, which, because the bristles are shorter in relationship to the length of it, I have a lot more control. But it's still, this does hold a lot of water because of the size of it. Not as much as a mop. And I'm not looking at my reference that much at this point. At this point, I'm just kind of looking at the strokes that I have on the paper and saying, what do I want to put here? What do I think would look best? And, you know, you and I might disagree. You might be like, geez, Lindsay, you know what? I like that like better 3 minutes ago. I wish you hadn't have gone so far. But when you're doing your painting, you can say, you know what? I think I'm going to stop here because I know how it's going to look if I go a little bit further, and I prefer it this way. And that's what learning's about. Art is so subjective. Everybody's a little bit different. Everybody likes things a little different. So you can paint it however you want. That's a pretty pink. It's very fresh. It's very lively. It almost looks like opera, but it isn't. Now you might decide that you want some harsher lines. You want to have some more punch, and you could go in with pen and ink. I'm taking some of this pink and adding into the pattern on the vase. Just not really pattern, but the texture of the vase. I think I want to take a little bit of the burnt sienna. Not that I have really a lot of extra room here, but I feel like I want just... I feel like I just want some leaves, more leaves. I'm loving the leaves. Maybe a leaf on the ground. I like to do that sometimes. Now, I'm going to go in with my green. Whoa. That was some strong paint. Maybe grab a little yellow. You vary the scale of your leaves so that they complement your painting. And you can also turn your painting around so you can reach it comfortably. I missed some of the shapes that I got on my first leaves that kind of got obliterated by the background, so I kind of wanted to go back in and get some of those back again, and that's what I'm doing here. I like the shapes of those. I feel like they're nice and fresh. And do a couple over here too. Gonna have a really juicy brush. liking these as much as I like the ones over there, though. I think I need some more like serrated edges on them. And sometimes I like to leave a little sliver of light in the center so that it gives you kind of like that center vein, or gives you the hint of it. You can also use leaves to negatively paint around like a flower petal if you don't feel like you're getting enough contrast or sharpness. I think I want to go to this brush for the one that's the leaf that's lying on the ground there. So much water in that, though. I'm gonna have to put another one over there, I think. Let me go. It's hard to talk during the thinking stage. If you're wondering why I'm so quiet here, I'm thinking. And you're probably thinking, gee, you talk an awful lot in your videos. I'm beginning to think you don't think much in your videos. That's why I have to practice everything beforehand, because I have to do all my thinking ahead of time. Oh, maybe a little bit of yellow. So this is a pretty, you know, as always, if you've watched many of my tutorials, you know I'm a big believer in a limited palette. This is a limited palette painting. We haven't used that many colors. We used 2 reds, 1 green, 1 blue, 1 brown, 1 yellow. I just feel like your painting has a better chance of being stronger if you limit your palette. Blot off the extra water there before I go in. I don't know if I really like that leaf. Oh shoot. Yeah, that's alright. We'll figure it. We'll fix it. It's a little big, but I think we can fix it just fine. Let's grab a little bit of brown and blue. Redefine the edge a little bit. Oh, that's better. This one's going to go right off the edge of the painting. Maybe a little bit of yellow in the highlight areas. A little bit of brown, blue-green in the shadow areas. Kind of drip it in. Let it do its thing. Sometimes I'm surprised at how long these loose paintings take me, because it doesn't seem like that it should. It seems like, oh, that should take like 15 minutes and you'll be done. But there's a lot more to it than you might expect. It's really tough to not overwork it as you're going and to keep everything nice and fresh. Now I'm just trying to debate whether there's anything else I want to do to this or not. Sometimes I like to go in with the bevel edge of a brush because you can, if the paper is just kind of damp, you can go in and you can kind of scrape some color away, or you can make a darker mark in it, which is handy for like the centers of flowers, centers of leaves rather, the veins. But it is marring the surface, so there's no kind of coming back from that if you end up not liking it. So I'm kind of wondering if I might want to add some gouache, which is an opaque watercolor, because I feel like some of the petals could just use a little bit of a body to them. And so I'm going to think about that, and I'll be back in a minute once I decide what I want to do. Okay, I did decide that I want to play with some gouache, and this is my gouache palette here. It's just a fish and tackle box where I have glued the dividers down so that paint can't seep underneath, and I put my gouache in there. And you can see that kind of cracked, but that's alright because I keep using it in there, so it's fine. And I'm using this cat's tongue brush. This is from the Zen Art Materials collection. They have a set of 5 for like 20 bucks. It's really a nice little set. And this looks really opaque when it goes on, but I've watered it down. It's actually not going to be that opaque when it dries. It's actually going to be it's going to blend in and mix in with what's underneath. So I wanted to use this brush because it's very responsive, and I get some really interesting shapes. I don't want to like lose everything, but I do want to get some white back. And just don't freak out. It does look a lot lighter than it's actually going to be. Mix a little bit of yellow into that. Give it that fluffy look that peonies have. Get that color right. Can't really tell what it's going to look like until it dries, but it's giving us a little bit of brightness. Now I'm going to grab a flat brush, and I'm going to take some of this yellow here, which is very opaque because it's a gouache. I'm going to mix it in with some of the green that we've already used, and I am going to add it to some of the flowers I think need a little help. And a little bit of white in there too. And this will give it a little bit more of like a illustration or a textile effect. But I was thinking these areas are a little flat looking. That would really help bring them to life a little bit. There, I think I really like that. I think I would like some really almost like white yellow spatters, so I'm going to just grab some of that gouache. I do not know why I have a ruler in my hand. It was on my table. Take some white. Actually, you know what? Spattering some white would look really good too. Let's just do some white on its own first. Hopefully I can get enough. Sometimes I'll use it right from the tube if I know I want to get like a spattery effect. But for the most part, I like to have it dried down because it's so convenient. I pretty much just keep a tube of white and this palette at my desk. I'm not going to get big spatters unless I have quite a bit more water. But that's what you can do once you've filled up your paper and it feels like everything's dark, is you can spatter on with white and then you get this freshness back again. And I want to do some with some yellow. I don't think yellow is represented enough. Now, if you get too much splatter somewhere, it's very easy to fix. Just take a paper towel and you can blot where you don't want all that spatter. If you got a little bit somewhere and you like, oh shoot, I didn't want that there, that's where you can blot it with a paper towel. We're going to let this dry, and then we'll see how it turned out and how it looks all together, and that will be that. So I'll see you in a minute with the final result. Okay, everything's dry. Let's take a look at this painting. It's a little bit different than how I envisioned it when I set out to paint it, but sometimes that happens. And that's okay. I think it's really important to go with the flow and really have fun and embrace the way your painting's going. And I did take my white pen and grab a few highlight lines just to bring a little bit more kind of structure to the piece. But, you know, all in all, it's pretty loose still, pretty fun, and I hope you enjoyed painting along today. Of course, you can change yours up however you want because it's your painting. If you're interested in learning more about painting loose florals, please check out my watercolor flower workshop. I'll link it up down below along with a coupon code to save you some cash if you want to try it out. Thank you so much for watching. Please give me a thumbs up and tell your friends if you enjoy these watercolor tutorials. Hit the subscribe button if you don't want to miss any. And until next time, happy crafting!